Hi there, my name is Interlight. My creator has been making kigurumi masks for more than 18 years already, and today we will share our knowledge about how to place seams in full-head kigurumi masks. So, what are we actually talking about today? So, seams in the mask, if you have a full-head kigurumi mask, you won't be able to put it on without opening the mask somehow, and you need to place that opening or the seam in how we shall call it in this lecture, somewhere on the through the mask, so you can open it and close it and keep it complete when it is on. And so we cannot skip this part. And in case we need to tell that in case of rigid hair or semi-soft hair, we will have to actually follow the creases and make the seams inside that the head scalp to follow the natural folds and make it look more natural. You won't get rid of the seam completely. It still will be visible, but it will be less more noticeable. It will feel more natural in that way, and that's why some people who make sculpted hair actually find, for example, some sculpted hair have a separate front part, and it is the natural seam, or in some cases there are some accessories added to the head, to the hair, and that accessories also makes the natural seam basically, so you can walk around with this. But in case you have a regular mask with just a wig or removable wig or hair attached to the mask itself, you can choose from one of the pretty generic positions, pretty generic places on the mask for the seam. And so we can actually have several areas for that. And here is the picture. This is the side view of the one of my recent models, and here we've marked the area where you can actually place the seam to the mask to be openable and to be, so you can open it and put it on or take it off. So this red area is the area where you can actually place the seam, and it is, as you can see, it's not everywhere, it is limited. So here we have the limit on this side. This side is dictated by the line of hair, the line where the wig ends, and the seam, the hair are ended. So there is a forehead. Here, this is the area, the forehead area, and if you will place seam lower, then the seam simply will be visible on the mask area most of the time. So this is the limit for this line. This part of the line is limited more because of you need to somehow place a locking mechanism that will keep your mask closed when in use. And currently a lot of people simply place the locking mechanism here, and this is a mistake, and I explained that mistake in details in the other videos. So you want to place the clasp or a lock or something as low as possible near this, near the neck seam, but here is at this place the mask is too close to the head, and there is a very little room there, so the middle ground is behind the ear. Sometimes you can move the seam closer to the ear if, for example, you use the ears themselves as locking pins. So you can move the seam closer. And if you have some internal locking mechanism, like I prefer to do, you also can move the seam a bit closer to the front and place it directly behind the ear, because every part of the mechanism simply lies behind the ear. But if you have regular clasps like that, you will want to leave some room here to add that. So there will be some material to connect the clasps. So this is why this a bit behind the ear we have this area. And this part, this position of the seam, the rearrest position of the seam is dictated by the size of performer's head, because when you place the seam along this side, you basically make the 3/4 mask with some extra part that makes the mask complete. So you will have to make the overall entrance to the mask large enough for performer's head to put the mask on, and to just complete the rest by a separate part, by the separate opening. Well, so this is how it works. Next, let's discuss different positions of the seams. Well, you probably can make the seam just directly, somewhere directly through that area. For example, in me the seam is simply like that. Well, there is one distinct advantage of this, because it simply makes the seam pretty simple. You can have just a plane. But in every other aspect, it is a pretty bad choice. Well, there is a second advantage, because you can fine-tune the seam position such that the mask can be split into half. That will fit into the calf in the limits of the airlines carry-on bags. So you can take the mask with you in the plane, not to put it in the luggage. But this is a pretty obscure and limited stuff, because, well, you probably note that it's pretty expensive endeavor, and you probably will find some different ways to ship your mask in case you actually would need to travel somewhere. Anyway, in other aspects, so this is a pretty dumb placement. And yes, I know it from my personal experience, because I did that several times. And the reason why it is dumb is because, well, the position of the seam is, for example, look at me, for me it is right here. And you can see that there is the front part of the wig and the rear part of the wig. And every time I put my face on, I will have to restyle and restore my hair, because otherwise my hair got messy. You can attach the front part of the wig to the mask, or you can attach the rear part of the wig to the mask, or you can simply store the wig somewhere else and attach it after you put on the mask. And in any situation, it will be a bit messy and will require some extra work from you or from your handler to restore the wig and to restore the haircut. So that's why actually this is not a good idea. So let's move to the other ideas and see how they actually perform better. And this is the better way to place the seam is the front seam of the mask. So it goes just by the line of when the wig is at the end of the wig, just above the forehead, and I have a mask blank for that. And as you can see, this is the position of the seam, and usually it is not as curvy as I usually do. It can be a bit more straight. For example, less amount of material behind the ear and less angular this lower part. Most of the makers simply make it very round at this area to prevent pinching the hair tie, and I just simply move those round elements more deep inside. So this seam have a lot of advantages. Well, I actually first time used it back in 2014, but it wasn't for the benefits of the seam. I was just simply following the shape of the mask. It had some sculpting on the face, and it was natural to place at that position. And I actually recognized the benefits of this design in 2016, the first time. So what benefits we actually have in this case, and they are pretty huge. First of all, you can do this with several faces. You can swap faces, and you reduce amount of the material. When you make a mask with several faces, because you have just a separate faces, and the rest of the mask, the haircut, all the elements, the hair, the paddings, all the stuff is simply on the one single part. That doesn't change, and it also makes it easier when you swap the faces because they almost do not interfere with the haircuts, except, for example, for the front bangs that can tend to try to get into the seam, so you will need to watch out for that. But in most cases, that's all inconveniences. The other thing with this seam is that it leaves a lot of room to access to the front part of the mask, to the face, so you have a lot of room to operate when you install eyes, when you install paddings in the front area of the mask. It also makes it easier to wear the mask with a respirator, because you can adjust the respirator pretty easily before you close the mask on. In this case, this idea is simply get a pretty widespread. So, as for me, I didn't get all the benefits from the ability to do the swappable faces. I did that experiments, but well, with modern 3D printing technology, it becomes more convenient, and as I prefer more robust, more traditional approach, it have some complications. For example, if you make the mask with this kind of seam and going to add different faces, you will have to very carefully adjust all the faces to the same back part, and this has some complications on the production side. But anyway, it is a very nice idea to use, very nice idea to utilize. So what's next do we have? What other good options do we have? And the other good option is the rear seam. So as you can see, here in Tisa we did this seam. You can see it here. And what it actually does, well, you can see the seam simply just placed below the wig, and when you have the mask on, when you put the mask on, the most disturbance is caused at this area near the end of the wig, where the hair are either styled pretty robust anyway, or just dangling straight down, so it's not so much disturbance for the hair in this case. And also the benefit of this position is that you can have both a three-quarter mask and a full head mask at the same time, because you do not even need to make this to make a hinge here. So well, you basically would have the mask that can be used as three-quarters, for example, for short-term activities, and a full head if you want a full head mask experience. But unlike in the previous situation, here we will have some complications of how to place the paddings, the eyes, and all that stuff inside the mask. So it can be a good idea to actually add some technical seam or maintenance seam somewhere here, and the position of that seam is simply replace that maintenance seam so that it gets under the hair. But anyway, it is good to place the seam at the most front position, so you can attach the wig to this extra part, and then both the front part, the face part, and the wig part together. So this is this idea. And of course we have the complex seams, as we told at the start. So this is basically the seam that follows the creases of the sculpted wig, or the overlaps of the sculpted wig, and we simply follow the form. The function follows form in this case, but you need to keep in mind that, well, the seam can be asymmetric. You may need to place a hinge in a not very obvious spot. For example, the mask can open not just open wide like a normal, but in the side, like somewhere to the side or semi-side. It can be a bit bared in this case. And also you will need to actually look for the perimeter of the seam to be large enough, and it can be a good practice to try to model how the performer's head would get into and out of the mask when the seam is open, to adjust the position of different parts of the seam or different small elements that can be in the way if you will not be careful enough. So keep this in mind. So this is about the seams, and as you can see, there is not much to compare. You basically get basically choose the design of your mask first, and after you choose the design, you simply have one or two options for the seams, and that's basically it. If you have a complex sculpted haircut, then you will need the complex seam. If you would have a regular mask with some generic hair and generic form, you should go to the front face or to the back seam, and the rest is, and if you have the mask with different faces or going to have mask with different faces, then it's simply the front seam. So for example, if you have the mask with respirator with all the other functions inside, then it's a front seam anyway. So this is it. So no comparison actually. Well, and now we shall talk about the other aspect of the mask seams, and this is hinges, how you connect the parts of the full head mask. So they actually need to help you to align the mask parts when you close the mask. They are not an absolutely necessary element. For example, I don't have a hinge, and Tisa also do not have a hinge. You just wiggle the parts of the mask together until they get into place, and then you snap it into one complete mask. But if you want a bit more convenience, then you can add a hinge, and we have quite a handful of options here. It can be just a piece of fabric or piece of thick thread that connects the parts. You can have a 3D printed hinge, you can have a hook, you can have a magnet. It's not actually a hinge, but the magnet does perform the main task of the hinge anyway, so I added it here. It can be a regular hinge, and it can be a hidden hinge. So let's walk through all the stuff, and again, you should choose one of that ideas based on what you actually try to implement. It's not like you have a variety of options in each particular case. So the first is the fabric hinge, well, or a thread hinge. Well, this stuff is it's not very technological. It is very as you can see, it's very unprecise. You simply put a thread on a piece of fabric or a piece of Velcro and glued it to both sides of the front and back side of the mask. And in case of Velcro, you, for example, can glue the some part of the Velcro inside, and the Velcro itself just use the make it removable. Or in case of a thread, you thread drill some holes along the seam, and you just make this kind of infinity shape on the thread. So you have these two stuff, and you then one part of the mask and the other part of the mask, and you put a thread like that. So, and it keeps the parts pretty much together, and you will secure them and place them to the designated points with the locking mechanisms, the clasps or the locks anyway. So it doesn't matter if this bit tilted and inaccurate. And because it is so easy to make this kind of hinge, it can be good for a do-it-yourself mask or make-it-home mask, because, well, it works. It actually works, and it does its function well enough. And it's also pretty light. The other thing we can encounter pretty much today is the printed hinge, and the idea is to print the parts of the hinge in the mask itself, in the parts of the mask itself. Just model them, connect them, and we have the hinge. And this is a terrible idea, especially a terrible idea with current modern techniques and approach to this kind of design. Because, well, currently, people who model this kind of hinges, they forget to add some reinforcement strips, they forget to make all that stuff, that elements, and the hinge gets basically a lot of forces gets through that hinge, especially when you open and close the mask, when you take the mask off the shelf and open it, something like that, because, well, let's assume when you take your mask, you can simply move it like that, and when you move the mask like that or like that, as you can see, the amount of force that comes to this particular point is pretty significant. So this kind of hinges simply make the mask crack. Simply, it's not the bad material, it's the bad design. So please do not use this kind of hinges because there are better options. Just the threaded option is better than this. Well, and of course I did a more detailed explanation in one of the other videos about 3D printed masks. So what does we have else? One of my early ideas was the hook and at the D-ring, or maybe a hook and at the something like that. So basically this is it. We have the hook, then flat. As you can see, it's pretty flat. It's wide, but it's flat. And a D-ring. And we simply connect them like this. Well, this is one of the earlier designs and more like a prototype. I did use it actually in some of my masks, but I abandoned that idea because, well, the idea was that you can have the face and the rest of the mask separable. So it's the swap face design or multiple face design. But it turned out that magnets perform this task simply better than this kind of stuff. It still has some strength in it, more strength than with magnets, but the most of the force and the most of the load is backed by the clasps or by the locks of the mask, so it simply not matter that much that you do not have this ability to keep that together under the pressure. And anyways, to separate the front part and the back part of the mask, you will have to perform some awkward movements. So you cannot just remove the front mask. You will have to somehow twist it a bit or move it in some unintuitive ways. And now, so let's talk about magnets. Instead of hook and the D-ring, we have a couple of magnets, the magnet on the face side and the magnet on the rear side of the mask. They perform the task of aligning the face and the rear side of the mask pretty well. So you have the alignment and then simply just clasp both parts together. And because they're securing the mask, they're keeping the mask in the one shape, is performed by the locking mechanism or by the spring locks, for example, or the locking mechanism or the clasps. This performs purely the aligning function, and because you do not have the complicated mechanism to separate the front part of the mask, the face, and the rear part, well, it is pretty convenient idea, and in this particular case, as well as the case of keeping the ice inside the mask, well, this is a pretty good idea, a pretty good use of strong magnets. And you do not need to have a very strong magnets. You can just have magnets that are strong enough to keep the face, several seconds in a non-dynamic situation. Well, for the completion of for the engagement of the locks. That's why you also do not need much reinforcement. It's also good to have reinforcement ribs here and there, so there won't be too much stress concentration around this stuff. But if the force will be too much, like you will try to take the mask and wiggle it in your hands, it just would separate into two parts, and you won't have that amount of damage onto the surface. And you can use this in 3D printed masks, as well as, of course, you can use it in fiber reinforced plastic masks or polyurethane resin masks that are stronger than 3D printed masks by design. So what we have next? The regular hinge. And what is the regular hinge? It is just, well, just a regular door hinge. So something like that. As you can see, it's a hinge. It's usually installed so that these surfaces are inside of the mask, and this surface is slightly outside of the mask. And well, as for the 3D printed hinges, so for this kind of hinges, this side is usually a bit visible, so you will need to place it accordingly. And it's a good idea to have hinges of roughly that size, of 5 centimeters wide hinges, maybe a bit longer, maybe 5 centimeters long for each arm, something like that. And as you can see here, we have the same kind of hinge. And also you can see that on the one part of the mask, on this part of the mask, this hinge is actually glued inside and stuck inside, and it is inseparable from this part. And on this part of the mask, we have these bolts and nuts. So we stuffed inside the bolts themselves inside the mask, and the hinge is here separable. But because of this design, we cannot use this this approach at the 3D printed masks, because in fiber reinforced plastic masks, we can reinforce the area and stuff the hinges inside very well, very securely, while in 3D printed masks, the material is simply not strong enough to keep that from cracking, especially when we start to move mask like that and basically move it not very respectably, move it like this kind. So keep that in mind. And there is a better version for the hinge. This is the hidden hinge. And well, I found out about those hinges about a year ago. And actually, well, my bad, because one of kigurumis from Japan used that kind of hinge for ages now. And this is the hidden hinges. So I have a couple of them. For example, this is a hinge like this. And if you can see, it moves like this. So the point of rotation is somewhere outside of the hinge. Here, this is the 60mm version. And we also have a 45mm version. They are the same size in this direction, and well, so as you can see, this hinge have 4mm clearance for each side of the mask, and this hinge have 5mm clearance for each mask. And for the rigid hair, this kind can be small enough. So because you need to have the amount of clearance above the hinge, so it can operate properly. And in this, and because the mask is not flat, it is a bit rounded. Well, you will have to account for not this point, but also for these points. So the smaller one simply fits to the curves a bit better. They are pretty solid. They can bear the weight of the mask and the movements of the masks. And the form factor of it is large and bulky enough that you can actually design the corresponding shapes in the 3D printed mask. That shapes you can design enough reinforcement ribs around that to keep that in place without introducing too much forces within the mask. And also because of the shape, you can see it is completely concealed inside. You can even make this attach it to just one side of the mask, and on the other side of the mask leave it to pure friction, so you will be able to, for example, to use it for the swappable faces. So that's a good idea. So this is, for me, this is the go-to way to introduce a hinge in the mask. Well, it's small, it's reliable, and it has a large enough surface area, so highly recommend this idea. Well, as you can see, that's all I have to tell to you today about the hinges, about the connection parts, about the seams of the masks. And yes, in some cases you can deviate from what I've told you here. There are smaller hidden hinges, for example, with the form of like a cylinder, small cylinder. Also, there are different kind of hinges that can be good enough as an element on top of your mask. Again, I oppose you from using the 3D printed hinges because, well, they are very suboptimal in most of the cases, but in some tiny cases, maybe that will be the right choice from the design standpoint, but you need to keep in mind that there are better options in the overwhelming majority of cases. Even the simple thread or piece of fabric is better than a 3D printed hinge. And the seam position, again, when you design the mask, think of how the mask would interact with how someone will put the mask on, how someone will take the mask off, how hair will get in your way when you do all the operations. All the things need to be considered when you design the seam and all that stuff. For example, if you would have the 3/4 mask with the extra element to close it to complete it, and you would try to install the hidden hinge inside that element, you will need to keep in mind that you lose about 15 to even 20 millimeters of space behind the mask, and you need to adjust the position of the seam accordingly so that 20 millimeters won't be crucial for the performer to put the mask on. For example, that case. Or you need to keep in mind where the locks or clasps are, and you will need to orient the locks and clasps accordingly depending on where you place the hinge, here or here, because the directions of the of the seam open, where the seam opens, it can open like this. So the direction of the clothing would be like here, or it can be open like this, and the direction is here, and it's almost two perpendicular directions. So you'll need to think about that as well. And in some cases, currently we're designing the mask that have both the front seam and the rear seam, and one of the perks of that mask is that it will be small enough to fit into the hand carry on the plane, because you will be able to disassemble it in three parts, and I have to come out with a pretty special designed hook that will connect all that three parts in the same way, and well, it's an interesting design and engineering task. So anyway, this is very interesting stuff. Well, so anyway, keep all the stuff and put attention to the designing of this kind of elements in the mask, because it's a good quality of life. So anyway, here is my Telegram channel with all the other videos and presentations, and this presentation as well. Also on this, you can get it downloaded on this channel with all the notes and stuff. So, well, thank you for watching, thank you for being with me, and well, adios. Oh, where is my... Okay, this is it.